Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today, my dear subscribers and listeners and guests to this channel, I would like to talk about Abu Dhabi talks or negotiations, but I think at this moment it's just talks. Any chance for peace agreement can be reached. That is what we're going to talk today. Now, when we talk about peace negotiations, the observers usually pay attention to various kinds of signs or indicators. These things like who said what, and what was the message sent, and who came and who didn't, and what is the agenda, and what are the interpretations and reactions, and so forth. So what I'd like to do is to discuss the latest events surrounding the talks in Abu Dhabi. As usual, I will focus on the latest developments and actions in Ukraine and of the European Union leaders and NATO leaders, and also, and most importantly, is there anything that we can discern that is new in Russia in terms of what's going on, the public opinion, the views in the army, and how Russian agenda has changed, if it did change, and I will argue that it has. But let me first start with Zelensky. Zelensky called President Trump just yesterday, and he complained that Putin had violated the agreement on a temporary ceasefire on hitting the energy infrastructure of Ukraine. As you all, I'm sure, are aware, the Russians have been blowing up the energy infrastructure, so a lot of people in Kiev and in Kharkov are suffering from cold, which is a very, very cold weather and unusually cold winter. Trump asked Putin, and Putin agreed, and this ceasefire lasted for 7 days, and it ended today. So Lindsey Graham took this opportunity of proposing to President Trump to deliver Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, and Zelensky again tried to encourage to encourage Trump to go to the same old route, to impose more sanctions, to exercise more pressure on Russia and on Putin in order to come to the negotiating table, as the favorite expression of Western analysts is. What's new about this? This is, of course, nothing new. This is the same position that Zelensky has had for months. Absolutely nothing new. Also, in the fact that he flatly refused to acknowledge Ukrainian defeats and to withdraw from the territory of Donbass, and that seems to be the condition that the Russians are demanding, and that the Americans have been encouraging Zelensky to accept, and he didn't. So now what's also interesting in terms of what's going on in Ukraine is that the latest public opinion polls show that 40% of Ukrainians would like to sign peace with Russia, even if it means territorial concessions in Donbass. Now, just those of you who are new to this channel, and I want to remind you that Donbass is the area that rebelled against the Ukrainians after the coup d'etat of 2014. This is the area that populated by the Russians. Officially, it was called New Russia, Novorossiya, and that these territories seceded from Ukraine in 2014 and voted overwhelmingly in a referendum to join Russia. So from the Russian point of view, when they come to a city or a town or a village, any inhabited place in Donbass, these people are considered automatically Russian citizens. So it is not a matter of conquest from the Russian point of view. This is a liberation of the territories that are officially a part of the Russian Federation. Now, just move on then to the position of the European Union in this. Most important, of course, is that the European Union is not included in the negotiations in Abu Dhabi. That is, of course, quite interesting in itself. And it seems to me that the Europeans decided to remind the world of their existence in this context. And the General Secretary of NATO, Mark Rutte, came to Kiev and addressed the parliament, the Rada, with the message that as soon as the agreement is signed, then there will be ships in the sea and airplanes in the air and troops on the ground, and the coalition of the willing will be enforcing the whatever agreement Ukraine signs. That this is a very interesting point, because on the one hand, some people interpret it as meaning that Ukraine will be helped by European Union. European Union stands guard on Ukraine and will help it to secure peace by some kind of security guarantee and the presence of its troops. On the other hand, Rutte knows very well that his statement that there will be troops on the ground is totally and categorically unacceptable to Russia. And if he knows that and says that, that can be interpreted to mean that he either doesn't believe that the Russians mean what they say and they're going to consider those as a target and destroy them as soon as they come to Ukraine, or it may mean that he simply doesn't want Ukraine war to stop, because he knows that if they do send the troops, the Russians will bomb them immediately. Or most likely the Russians will not sign anything, because they would know that as soon as they sign, the Europeans are going to send in the troops. And that is one of the reasons of the war to begin with. So that seems to be counterproductive in terms of expectation that some kind of a peace deal may come out in Abu Dhabi. So that's the position on this thing by the Europeans. Now, another thing the Europeans have done also is that they finalized the financial package for Ukraine, which had been signed a couple of months ago in December or November. And now they say that $90 billion or euros is finally available to Ukraine. Now, of those, one should remind everyone who is not aware, 40 billion goes to pay for the previous debts. So in real life, it will be only 50 billion available to Ukraine over 2 years, which means 25 billion a year. Is that a lot or is it not a lot? Well, basically, it's not a lot at all, because the Ukraine needs 10 billion a month to conduct the war the way it has been conducted. That's everything included, with the ammunition and the army and the state apparatus and the payments and so forth. Now, obviously, we now know a lot of money was stolen by the Ukrainian bureaucrats. But in any case, 50 billion is not even going to last them this year. Maybe if they're really, really, really careful, it might, but not longer than that. So in that case, this is not a long-term supply of funds either. But now let me move on to the Russian position and what's new about it. And I would call this a Putin's dilemma. Now, what is Putin's dilemma? His dilemma is that Putin has been trying very hard over the last months, or last year, one should say, to keep Trump happy. He's been saying all kinds of compliments to Trump, and he's been trying to be as polite as possible, as friendly as possible, not to antagonize Trump. Now, obviously, the explanation is that the United States under Trump stopped military help to Ukraine, and that's a big deal. That's a lot. There are no longer any American missiles hitting Russian cities, and the only missiles of American production that are still there are the ones that are sold through NATO to the European Union, and they provided to Ukraine in turn. So Putin's dilemma, he cannot antagonize Trump. He wants the negotiations to continue so that there is a good relations and a possibility of some kind of negotiated settlement, which still theoretically is possible. Now, to remind you, the official Russian terms that have been proclaimed in June 2024 is that Russia wants 4 provinces of Donbas, which means Kherson, Zaporozhye, Donetsk, and Lugansk, plus Crimea, and also, in addition to that, no membership of NATO, no presence of foreign troops, restoration of the Russian language rights, and the Russian Orthodox Church. So these have been announced 2 years ago. In 4 months, it would be 2 years ago. And they are still officially Russian terms that are on the table in Abu Dhabi. However, and that is very important, the situation has changed, and it has changed in the army as well, in Russian army. And that is that there are changes on the ground that mean that in a short time, the Russians will be able to take the 4 provinces by force. In other words, right now, there's an unfolding offensive on Slovyansk, which is in Donetsk province, which is a fortified position, a city that will be taken by some estimates by July. In the south, it is the offensive on Zaporozhye. And once these are taken, and then Kherson, then all 4 provinces will be under Russian control. And in that case, the legitimate question that is on everybody's mind is what is next? If the Ukrainians continue to refuse any kind of territorial concession, what are Russians going to do once they take or liberate the 4 provinces that they are now fighting for? And obviously, the answer that we find in most discussions by specialists, observers, and the generals and the army itself is that the next is in the north. It is Kharkov and Sumy, possibly Kiev, and in the south, it is Kherson and Odessa. Now, these areas are historically known as Novorossiya. Most Russians consider it a part of Russia. These were the territories which I explained many times were given to Ukraine by Lenin and historically has not been a part of the of Ukraine in the past. Now, the offensive on Kharkov has already begun. It is sort of very slow. They're edging closer to it, and it is 40 kilometers from the border, and it is probably about 20 kilometers now to Kharkov. The biggest problem that I see in the discussions of why the Russians have not taken Kharkov yet is that these are, from the point of view of Russians, they're Russian citizens, and they don't want to bomb it. They don't want to use the carpet bombing as has been done in various other wars, including Gaza. They want to minimize the casualties in taking a city over 1 million people. And that is extremely hard because there could be street fighting, and it was very, very costly when they took Bakhmut, for example. So this is why one of the explanations why they're bombing the heating infrastructure is that they want as many people to leave Kharkov and Kiev as possible so that the storming of the city could have minimal number of civilian casualties, which are not just civilian casualties, but which are Russian citizens by definition. So the expectation of the military operation is that the offensive after the four provinces are taken will continue to Kharkov and Odessa. And then there is a discussion of what happens if and when it happens, what part of Ukraine will be remaining as Medvedev put it, independent. And in any case, there must be, he said, the government that is not inimical to Russia and does not represent any threat to Russia in the future. Now, there's also one view that says that if it took the Russians 4 years to fight over four provinces in Donbass, it will take them another 4 years to advance to Odessa and to Kharkov. Now, the answer is no, it won't, because there's a kind of a speeding up effect. And with every single month, the Russian offensive is quicker and quicker because the Ukrainian army is getting weaker. The supplies are getting smaller. The number of draft dodgers and those killed and wounded, the number of draft dodgers is growing, and the number of casualties is growing. The capacity of Ukrainian army to resist is diminishing, and it seems like with every passing month, the Russian offensive is accelerating. So now getting back to the Putin dilemma question. And that is, my understanding is that it would be very difficult for Putin to stop his army. They are on the move, and it would be extremely difficult to order them to stop and sign some kind of agreement with Zelensky government, which is loathed by the majority of the Russians. And for that reason, I believe he will go through the motions of conducting negotiations while the Russian army is advancing. And it would be interesting to see how far they will get by the middle of the year and how their goals would change depending on that outcome. And this is it for today, my dear friends. And I would like to remind you that I have several other playlists on Russian history, on Russia under Yeltsin and Putin, on Soviet history, on European history. And for those of you who are interested in my life experience, I have a personal narratives playlist where you could listen to a long interview with 4 parts with Carissa Tauber, where I discuss various stages of my life and my writings. And I invite you to read my latest book, From Vladimir Lenin to Vladimir Putin, Russia in Search of Its Identity. Goodbye, until next time.